I've got the great pleasure to introduce to you now our honored guest who is coming to us via the ones and zeros from Atlanta, Georgia this morning. Natosha Reid Rice is Habitat for Humanity International's first Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and is leading the development and execution of Habitat's social strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to assuming that role, she was the Associate General Counsel at Habitat and worked to create programs and strategies to generate sources of capital to enable Habitat affiliates to build affordable housing with families throughout the entire country. In addition to her work at Habitat, Natosha served as an associate pastor at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia for 11 years, before joining All Saints Episcopal Church as its Minister for Public Life. Will you join me in welcoming Natosha through the waves? Now, this is a little strange for an old guy like me. I'm going to be having a conversation with Natosha, who's looking at me on a monitor back there, but I'm actually talking to an image of Natosha, and which you are going to see up here. So ignore how strange all of it sort of feels, but listen to what it is she has to say, because the topics that we're exploring and the work for all of us is very, very, very significant. Natosha, much has been said about Habitat's roots as a faith-based organization with Justice Ministry of Affordable Housing as its mission. We have some of the most significant religious diversity within the bounds of our affiliate in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, and yet there are many who may also shy away from the potential religious conflicts that might be associated with such a mission. There are still others who, for political reasons, are not comfortable working with a faith-based organization. In what ways would you say that Habitat's mission is really a broader community mission? And in which ways does Habitat's mission, though rooted and motivated by faith, really transcend faith?
Well, let me first say good morning. Hello to all. If you think it's strange for you, I can't see anyone but you. So I'm assured that there's a full room of folks. That's right. And it's not just some track of applause that you need for to feel good about the work you're doing. No, I just want to say good morning, and I'm just so excited to join forces with you this morning and to see the great work that you all are doing there in the Metro Maryland area. So very excited to be here. Now to your question. As many of you know, Habitat is grounded in a theological beginning. You know, we have a theological imperative to love our neighbors as ourselves. We have a theological imperative to put God's love into action. And that's a comprehensive whomsoever mission. You know, even our vision statement for Habitat says we believe in a world where everyone has a decent place to call home. So that everyone language, that whomsoever language that comes out of even the Christian theology is one that embraces community and one that embraces all. I really like to lean into the work of multi-faith and interfaith, because it's in that space that we're able to see the treasures of other communities and faith traditions, as well as to understand how they enrich one another. Barbara Brown Taylor, an Episcopal priest and a current professor, wrote a book entitled Holy Envy. And in it, she says, and I'll paraphrase, she says, whenever she's pushed to choose between her neighbor and her religion, she always chooses her neighbor, because our God never told us to love our religion. When we get into the depth of that, it really pushes us to now say, oh, if we are really to embody the love of God and put it into action, then we have to love God's image that walks upon the earth, right? So that is the imago Dei of God, the image of God that we see right before our very eyes. And so how we live that out through the Habitat mission is essential. And so working and walking in that every oneness and pushing forward what I call a neighboring movement is essential to us realizing our vision and our mission.
Thank you. Thank you very much. An additional question. Here at the Metro Maryland affiliate, we are embarking on two major projects in Montgomery County. The first one is at Randolph Road in Silver Spring, and the other is at Heritage Emery Grove in Gaithersburg. In both of these neighborhoods, people live among the greatest racial, ethnic, religious, and economic diversity in the country, not just the state. And I know your focus at Habitat is currently DEI, and that Habitat International is launching a Black homeownership initiative. What are the challenges to affordable housing presented by our country's history of structural racism? And what opportunities are being presented to us as we approach this work from a DEI perspective?
Yeah, that's a wonderfully framed question because it allows me to talk about a whole bunch of stuff, but I have limited time. So bear with me because I'm going to try to squeeze it all in.
I won't cut you off.
I think it's important for us to know, and the great work that you all are doing is context-based, right? You're looking and having to be a part of the community in which you are pushing forward the mission of Habitat. A simple way in which I describe diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in the Habitat context, is at Habitat, we're Habitat for Humanity. The focusing in of the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens pushes us to focus in on the humanity in Habitat and to really begin to see those who we otherwise haven't seen, who are on the margins, and to hear those voices we otherwise haven't heard, listened to, or included. So the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion pushes us beyond structural limitations. And we see that in the housing sector in particular, that historically in the United States, housing opportunities have been limited to those who've been on the margins, which have been African Americans specifically, people of color generally. And so the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is like the parable of Jesus when he has his 100 sheep and one goes off astray and he leaves the 99 to go find the one. The work of DEI is going after the one, going after those populations that have been marginalized, that have been led astray, that have been denied access to the opportunity that we call America, right? In pursuit of happiness, the importance of land ownership, that's essential even to kind of our founding foundations of us as a country. So when we look at housing in this country, we can't do it outside of context. We have to look at the structural barriers that have been put in place. We go back to the 1920s and 30s when the federal home, the FHA limited the number of families or the types of families that would receive any type of mortgage insurance. And it was through the support of FHA that suburbs were launched all over the country. And access to those homes in those suburbs was denied to African Americans specifically, right? When we begin to look at the restrictive covenants in deeds all over this country, even in places within this country that don't have a legacy of Jim Crow. We look out west in California, in Richmond, California, when we look in the Midwest, in Cleveland, Ohio, these were communities that were once integrated that were then segregated by federal law and federal policy. And so we're coming into a context where our communities, our neighborhoods have been divided by race. And now we've got to come in courageously today to figure out how we begin to repair those separations, to bridge those divides and bridge those gaps. So the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just some conceptual Shangri-La, right? It is, we have to cast the vision and then we have to do the work. And you all are intimately involved in doing the work. And we know that means there are many layers to this work. There is a reason why the civil rights movement halted in housing, right? The Fair Housing Act wasn't passed until 7 days after Martin Luther King was assassinated. Martin Luther King and his team around the country tried to make progress in housing when he had the Chicago campaign. There are so many layers to housing. We have so many industries that intersect there. We also have the space, it becomes a more intimate space. So it becomes a much more crucial space where we have the divisions that we have to bridge. And so the work that you all are doing requires community engagement, requires an asset-based approach, as you're doing, requires the ability to bring together all these layered financing options and subsidies so that we can begin to peel back the onion of structural racism, of structural divisions, and begin launching a new narrative and a new strategy and showing others what it means to build together rather than to build apart.
Well, that's fantastic. Can you say a word just briefly about what Habitat is imagining with its Black Home Ownership Initiative.
Yeah, and so as we get into one way that we express and cascade the vision of diversity, equity, and inclusion is through a very specific and intentional strategy, program strategy. And so one of the ways in which we're doing that is through our Advancing Black Homeownership Initiative. And why? Because one, we're looking to deal with those marginal communities. The African American community in particular has one of the lowest homeownership rates of any demographic in the country. And it's oftentimes realized that that's attributed to the history of segregation in this country. In addition, that gap appears to be growing, right? So when we look at a lot of data, we see that that's a gap. It's a growing gap. We know that there is a connection, a direct connection between home ownership and wealth in this country and wealth building. And home ownership is a crucial component to being able to build wealth. The gap in wealth in between Black and white households in this country, it's such that it takes approximately 10 Black households' wealth to equal one white household's wealth. When we look at home ownership, there's a division of home ownership among the Black community in this country. There's different sources of data, but it's approximately in the low 40 percentile points. But you look at white home ownership and it's close to 75%. That gap is something that we want to address. And what is so great is that when we begin to address the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, the solutions that we create actually help those who are not at the rim or the edges of that division. And so the work of Advancing Black Homeownership will obviously help us to address other marginalized groups and provide strategies that address housing solutions for those groups as well.
Well, Natosha, we thank you so much for making the early morning sacrifice to be with us. I know you were out at the polls last night. And on behalf of our affiliate and all of our guests here, we thank you for the work that you're doing in Habitat. Thanks so much for coming.
And thank you all.